Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I never thought one simple choice would lead me into the most complicated and unforgettable night of my life. Sometimes the boundaries we set for ourselves get blurred in ways we never imagine, and what starts out as comfort or closeness can quickly turn into something far more dangerous, thrilling, and confusing. Tonight, I want to share a story that has lived inside me for years, an experience I never thought I would tell out loud. It's a story about love, temptation, and the consequences of crossing a line that should never have been crossed. It began on what seemed like an ordinary evening. The house was quiet, the lights dim, and everyone else was asleep. There was nothing special about that night, yet something in the air felt heavier than usual. I was with someone I trusted, someone who was supposed to be a figure of care and stability. But closeness can sometimes become too close, and in a moment of vulnerability, emotions got tangled, and the unthinkable happened. What I thought was a bond of safety suddenly shifted into something I didn't know how to stop. I'll be honest, this isn't an easy story to tell. It's not just about physical closeness, but about the storm of emotions that came with it. The warmth, the tension, the fear of being caught, and the undeniable thrill of stepping into forbidden territory. When two people are caught in that kind of moment, it feels like the whole world disappears. Every sound in the house becomes sharper, every breath louder, and every second feels stretched into eternity. And that's exactly what happened. The person I was with that night wasn't a stranger. He was part of my life in ways that made this even harder to accept. At first, it felt like a secret between us, something only we would ever know. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, often when you least expect it. And in our case, the secret didn't just stay hidden. It was about to explode in a way that would change everything forever. Because just as the tension was at its highest, the door suddenly opened. And standing there, frozen in shock, was the last person I ever wanted to see. My stepdad. The silence after that moment felt like it lasted forever. My stepdad didn't say a word, but the weight of his stare was enough to freeze me in place. I could feel my heart pounding so loudly that I was sure the whole house could hear it. I didn't know if I should speak, explain, or pretend nothing had happened. But how do you hide something when it's already so clear? That single look told me this wasn't going to stay buried anymore. To understand how everything came to this point, you need to know what was happening before that night. My life wasn't as simple as it might have looked from the outside. Our family had gone through changes, and sometimes those changes left me feeling alone in my own home. My mom worked long hours, often late into the night, and the space she left behind was filled with silence. My stepdad had always been there, the steady figure who made sure things were okay, someone who gave advice when I needed it and noticed when I was quieter than usual. That closeness wasn't sudden, it grew slowly, in moments that seemed small at the time, but carried more meaning than I realized. A late-night conversation in the kitchen, the way he'd ask if I was doing all right, or how he'd notice when I was stressed and offer comfort. Those little things made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't supposed to turn into anything more. But emotions are tricky, and sometimes they lead us down paths we never planned to walk. Looking back, I think the lines blurred when comfort turned into something heavier. It wasn't about wanting something forbidden, it was about connection, about filling a space that felt empty. I didn't see it happening at first. I thought it was just kindness. Just someone caring enough to listen. But the way his eyes lingered a little longer, the way the air felt charged when we were in the same room, told a different story. And the truth is, I felt it too. That night, when everything shifted, it wasn't a planned choice. It was one of those moments where emotions overflow and common sense disappears. The world outside that room didn't exist for a while. It was just the two of us, caught in something neither of us could fully control. And yet, as powerful as that connection felt, the reality of what we had done came crashing in the second the door opened. My stepdad's silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. He didn't shout, didn't move right away, he just stood there. His face was unreadable, a mix of disbelief and something else I couldn't name. That uncertainty scared me more than anger would have. Because when someone is angry, at least you know what to expect. But his silence left me with endless questions. Did he understand? Did he hate me? Was he going to tell my mom? The days leading up to that night replayed in my head over and over. I thought about the times I caught myself looking too long, the way my heart would skip when he was near, and how easy it was to ignore the little warnings in my mind. Maybe part of me had been waiting for something to happen, even if I never admitted it to myself. Now, everything hung in the balance. The secret wasn't just ours anymore. Someone else had seen it, someone who had the power to unravel everything. And as I sat there frozen in that silence, I knew the choices we made next would decide whether our lives fell apart completely or if the secret could somehow stay hidden. The hours after that night felt like walking on broken glass. Every sound in the house, every word spoken, carried a weight that hadn't been there before. My stepdad avoided looking at me directly, yet his silence spoke louder than anything else could. My mom, completely unaware of what had happened, moved around the house as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I couldn't stop replaying that moment when the door opened, when his eyes locked on me, and when everything we thought was hidden was suddenly laid bare. The conflict wasn't just about being caught, it was about what it meant. Were we just two people who got lost in a dangerous moment, or had we been building toward this for longer than either of us admitted? That was the question that kept circling in my mind. And the longer I thought about it, the more I realized that what scared me wasn't just the risk of being exposed, it was how much I didn't regret it, despite knowing I should. The days that followed became a kind of quiet war between what was spoken and what wasn't. My stepdad went about his usual routines, but every glance carried tension. When our eyes met, it was like electricity, charged, dangerous, but impossible to ignore. He never mentioned what he saw that night, and I didn't either. That silence became its own language, one that made me wonder if he was waiting for me to speak first. A subplot began to take shape in the most unexpected way. My mom, sensing that something was off but not knowing what, started asking small questions. "Is everything okay?" she'd say, glancing at me and then at him. She didn't push, but her eyes lingered in ways that made me nervous. Did she feel the distance between us? Did she sense the secret beneath the surface? Or was it all in my head, guilt twisting every normal moment into something suspicious? What complicated everything even more was how my own emotions refused to quiet down. Instead of fading, they grew stronger. I found myself noticing details I never used to, the way his hand tightened around a glass, the way his voice softened when he asked me something simple, the way he'd look at me when he thought no one else was watching. It wasn't just me imagining it anymore. There was something there, something neither of us could admit out loud. One night, while sitting alone in the living room, I felt him pause in the doorway. He didn't step in, didn't say anything, but I knew he was there. That moment stretched endlessly, filled with words neither of us dared to speak. Was he angry? Was he curious? Or was he fighting the same battle inside that I was? The not knowing was worse than anything else. The air in the house grew heavier with each passing day, like a storm waiting to break. Every interaction, no matter how ordinary, carried layers of unspoken words. My mom, still unaware, continued her daily routines, but I could feel her watching us more closely. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was just the way tension leaks through silence, but I knew she sensed something. Her questions became sharper, her tone more curious, and each time she asked if I was all right, my chest tightened. Meanwhile, the distance between me and my stepdad wasn't really distance at all. It was a closeness wrapped in restraint. The way his eyes would meet mine across the room and then quickly look away said more than if he had spoken. It was as if we were both suspended between two worlds, the world we showed everyone else and the one we carried inside, too fragile and too dangerous to expose. Every time we crossed paths in the hallway, every time his hand brushed too close to mine, it felt like something could happen again at any second. The suspense grew worse at night. When the house was quiet and shadows stretched long across the walls, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, the secret that connected us, but also threatened to destroy everything. My thoughts ran in circles. Was he thinking about it too? Was he regretting it? Or was he waiting, like me, for what would come next? The silence was unbearable, but the truth felt impossible to speak. One evening, it all came to a breaking point. My mom had gone out late for work, leaving just the two of us at home. The quiet was louder than ever. I tried to focus on anything else, reading, scrolling, distracting myself, but every sound from the other room made me aware of his presence. When he finally walked in, the tension between us filled the space instantly. He didn't say anything at first, but the way he stood there, like he was deciding whether to step closer or walk away, made my breath catch. I couldn't tell if it was fear or anticipation running through me, maybe both. The look in his eyes was the same one from that night, conflicted, yet unshakably drawn. We were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something we both knew couldn't last, but neither of us seemed ready to turn back. And then, just as the silence between us felt like it would snap, we heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My mom was home earlier than expected. The moment shattered instantly, leaving us frozen in place, caught between what we almost did and what we had to hide. The sound of my mom's car door slamming outside jolted us back into reality. My stepdad and I exchanged one last look before stepping apart, both of us scrambling to erase the weight of what had almost happened. He turned away quickly, pretending to busy himself in the kitchen, while I sank back onto the couch, forcing my body to still even as my heart raced. When she walked in, cheerful and unsuspecting, I realized just how thin the line between secret and discovery had become. One wrong move, one wrong glance, and everything would unravel. But fate wasn't done with us yet. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, another twist began to take shape. Over the next few days, my mom's behavior shifted. She became more curious, watching us both with sharper eyes. She started asking small but pointed questions: why I seemed so restless, why my stepdad looked distracted, why the energy in the house felt off. It wasn't just her instinct anymore, it was suspicion, and suspicion is a dangerous seed. Then came the night that changed everything again. My mom was on the phone, her voice hushed but urgent, and I overheard just enough to realize she wasn't speaking to a friend or coworker. She was talking about us. She mentioned how things didn't feel right, how she sensed a distance, and how she needed to know the truth. My chest tightened with panic. She was already piecing the puzzle together, and if she kept digging, the truth wouldn't stay buried much longer. The twist came in the most unexpected way. She didn't confront me directly. Instead, she confided in my stepdad, cornering him when she thought I wasn't listening. I could hear every word from the hallway. Her voice cracked with worry as she asked him if there was something between us, if he had noticed how different I'd been acting. The room went silent for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting for him to answer. What he said next wasn't what I expected. Instead of denying everything outright, he hesitated. That pause alone was enough to send a chill through me. Why didn't he just say no? Why didn't he shut it down completely? That single moment of silence made everything more dangerous. It was as if he was torn between protecting me, protecting himself, and maybe, just maybe, admitting that what existed between us was real. From that night forward, the stakes doubled. My mom's suspicion grew stronger, my stepdad's silence became heavier, and I was caught in the middle of a storm I couldn't control. Every conversation at the dinner table felt like walking through fire, every question from my mom felt like a test, and every glance from him carried the weight of a choice we hadn't made yet. The romantic tension between us didn't fade, it grew sharper under pressure. The more we tried to hide it, the more obvious it felt. And deep down, I couldn't ignore the terrifying thought: maybe my mom wasn't the only one who suspected. Maybe others could see it too. A neighbor's curious stare, A friend's casual comment about how close we seemed, it all piled onto the fear already simmering inside me. The night everything came crashing down was nothing like I imagined. There was no slow build-up, no time to prepare. It happened in a sudden storm of words, looks, and emotions that none of us could escape. My mom finally confronted us, her suspicion no longer hidden, her voice shaking as she demanded the truth. She had noticed every glance, every hesitation, every unspoken tension. The silence that had been protecting us suddenly became our enemy. She looked at me first, her eyes filled with disbelief and pain. "Tell me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is there something I should know?" My throat tightened, my mind raced for words, but none came. And in that moment of hesitation, she turned to him. The air between them was heavy, and I knew the choice he made next would decide everything. My stepdad finally spoke, his voice low but steady. He didn't tell the whole truth, but he didn't lie either. He admitted that things had grown complicated, that emotions had crossed lines they shouldn't have. He called it a mistake, a word that cut me like a knife, because I knew it wasn't just that. It was more, something neither of us had dared to fully admit. My mom's face fell, tears spilling as the weight of his words sank in. The house felt like it was breaking apart around us. For the first time, the secret wasn't ours anymore. It was exposed, raw and undeniable. The climax wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet devastation. My mom's silence after his confession was worse than any shouting could have been. She looked at me one last time, her expression a mix of heartbreak and betrayal, and then she left the room without another word. I thought that was the end, that everything had been destroyed, that the family we had was gone forever. But then came the twist none of us expected. The next morning, before I even had time to process what had happened, my mom made a decision that stunned me. Instead of leaving him, instead of throwing us both out of her life, she said she wanted to fix things. Not ignore them, not pretend, but fix. Her idea of fixing wasn't forgiveness, it was control. She set rules, boundaries, and a watchful eye that turned the house into a cage. The real twist was realizing that the story wasn't ending at all, it was just shifting into something even more complicated. The secret was no longer hidden, but it wasn't truly over either. The tension remained, reshaped into something darker, quieter, but just as powerful. The days after the confrontation were strangely quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. The truth had been spoken, even if only in pieces, and now we were living in the aftermath. My mom carried herself with a calmness that felt unnatural, as though she was holding everything together with sheer will. She didn't bring it up again, but the air around her was heavier, her eyes sharper, and the warmth she once carried seemed dimmer. She was watching, guarding, protecting herself from being blindsided again. My stepdad withdrew in his own way. He buried himself in routines, filling every gap in his day with work or chores. He avoided being alone with me, and when our paths crossed, his words were clipped and careful. The tension that once sparked between us had been smothered, not because the feelings weren't there, but because acknowledging them again was no longer possible. The line had been crossed, and now it was sealed in guilt. For me, the hardest part wasn't the loss of closeness, it was the emptiness that followed. What had felt powerful and consuming now left me with questions I couldn't answer. Was it love, or was it simply loneliness disguised as something deeper? Had I mistaken connection for romance, or had we both been trapped in a storm of emotions neither of us could control? Those questions lingered, keeping me awake at night, forcing me to reflect on everything that happened. The resolution came not in a dramatic ending, but in acceptance. I realized that sometimes relationships blur when people are vulnerable, and the choices we make in those moments carry consequences we can't undo. Secrets can bind people together, but once revealed, they leave cracks that never truly heal. My mom's decision to stay was proof of that. She chose to rebuild, but it wasn't the same house anymore. It was one patched with distrust, with rules, with silence. As for me, I learned to carry the weight of what happened without letting it define me. It was a chapter, painful and complicated, but it didn't have to be the whole story of my life. The romance that once felt like fire had burned itself out, leaving only lessons in its ashes. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones with happy endings, but the ones that remind us of the fragile lines we walk between love, temptation, and choice. And maybe that's why this story will stay with me forever, not because of how it ended, but because of everything it forced me to see about myself, about relationships, and about the cost of secrets. So I'll leave you with this. Do you think some mistakes can ever truly be fixed, or are they scars we simply learn to live with? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like a sequel to this story, where I explore what happened years later, comment below. Summary of the story: a forbidden connection grows inside a fractured home, leading to a night of discovery when a secret is exposed. Suspicion, silence, and unspoken emotions threaten to tear everything apart. When the truth finally comes out, the fallout changes the family forever, leaving behind lessons about love, temptation, and the heavy cost of secrets.